Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast of the Center for Asian American Christianity. My name is David Chao. I'm the director of the Center for Asian American Christianity. And I would like to invite my guest, Jeff Liou, to introduce himself. Jeff, would you care to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. It's good to see you again and glad for the work of the center. I am the child of immigrants from Taiwan, and I live in Southern California now after having moved from, I grew up in Oklahoma. I went to school in Michigan, and then I went to school in Chicago. Then I came out to Southern California for school where I've been for the last almost 15 years. Is that right? Longest place I've lived anywhere. I've got two kids. One of them is about to be a college student, which is mind blowing and
Oh
so
boy.
exciting. And
I'm
then,
gonna have to I'm gonna have to talk to you about how that transition's been for you as a parent.
well, the main thing is I'm a rabid University of Michigan football fan. I'm irrational, idolatrous, you name it. But now that my daughter is going to another Big Ten school, and one of the new additions, University of Oregon, I couldn't be more excited to be completely decked out in Oregon gear. So go
Ooh,
Ducks, go Ducks.
wow.
And then my son is 15 and he's in high school here in our local high school. Married to Lisa for decades.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome. And Yanan, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the podcast, David. Glad to be here. My name is Yanan Melo. I am actually an international student from the Philippines. Moved here with my family in 2015 to Chicagoland. And now I am doing my my Master of Divinity Studies here at Princeton Theological Seminary, where I also serve as a research assistant for the Center for Asian American Christianity. So yeah, glad to be here and good to
Awesome.
meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you, Yanan.
Yanan is a rock star, research assistant, editor. I could we could not do what we do at the CAAC without Yanan, and also a shout out to Shreya Ramachandran, our other research assistant, and also Shori Zinin, who is our project manager and makes all these things possible. Um, by way of a more formal introduction, our guest is also an author of this relatively recent publication, Christianity and Critical Race Theory, along with his co author, Robert Chao Romero. Now, Jeff got his PhD at Fuller and is the National Director of Theological Formation for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and Affiliate Assistant Professor of Christian Ethics at Fuller, as well as co-founder of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. A shout out to Ray Chang and the AACC and all of its important and good work, as well as to Daniel Lee and his center at Fuller. So there's a lot of connections, Jeff, that you have that are very significant in the conversation about Asian American Christianity. This book uh, on race is it's hitting a hot topic, especially when you frame it with respect to critical race theory that gets all sorts of side jabs as well as um, kind of endorsements within the political discourse. And I'm sure we're going to get to it.
Mhm.
But typically, when there's a new book with an Asian American Christian author, I want to set the personal background first. So, can you say a little bit of how you got interested in the topic of your book?
Absolutely. Happy to do so. And that's a wise strategy for podcasts like this. I I didn't think about race in academic terms or in the terms that we know it now. Growing up in Oklahoma, right? Not a lot of opportunity. My parents cultivated within me a sense that we were different, and those today might be called kind of racial formation at the very early stages. But it was really because of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in college when we started thinking about race and ethnicity. So we back in those days, this was the late '90s. We had these two back-to-back phrases, almost like a Venn diagram, like these two phrases that go together. Um, uh, Racial reconciliation is one very Christianese phrase, and multi-ethnicity. So M-E and R-R. These two things went together. And what we meant by that was InterVarsity's mission was to make sure that we were preaching the gospel in an inclusive way, that we were thinking about every kind of person that was out there, every racial and ethnic person that was out there. And so the more I leaned into that, the desire to share the gospel, the good news of Jesus with people that were not like me, the more I had to begin thinking about both ethnicity, race, culture, nationality, and other kinds of identity vectors. So that's really the very beginning of the theological thinking about race and ethnicity. But, I went to seminary, did my MDiv in cross-cultural ministry, did a little bit more thinking there, wrote every paper with that in mind. And then I decided I wanted to do a PhD on this because I thought it would be helpful for InterVarsity, who was still talking about racial reconciliation, despite the fact that the conversation was moving onward. I mean, what I was learning from the university side of things, especially student affairs, was so different from what we were talking about in Christian circles with regard to racial, quote unquote, reconciliation, that I was like, I probably should go and do a little bit more research and thinking, and hopefully I might come back to InterVarsity, which I did in 2019, and be helpful to update the conversation on race and justice and ethnicity and culture. So that's kind of the background and journey that I was on to begin thinking about the topic. But when it comes to CRT, is really meeting Robert. CRT comes from legal studies. Robert is an attorney, also a history professor at UCLA. And I did a directed reading with him during my PhD. He introduced me to all these texts back in the very early 20-teens, before it all blew up. CRT blew up in the news. And so we began talking and thinking and writing together long before the brouhaha.
That's really fascinating, Jeff. I'm very much appreciate your perspective there. I'm just really curious how your engagement with CRT in particular has helped you understand better. I mean, also this is, a podcast for Asian Americans in particular, asking those questions about what does it mean to be an Asian American and Christian. But what's really fascinating, I think, and I'm curious for your thoughts here, is how you think CRT helps us better understand, right, how racialization works, especially with regard to Asian Americans. I think it's something I have in mind a lot is, like stereotypes like the model minority or the perpetual foreigner, right, that are so proliferated when we talk about Asian Americans in public discourse. And so
Yeah.
what I'm really curious is in your understanding in your own research, how do you think CRT um, really helps us understand better how that racialization works?
Great question, Yanan. So let's just take those two very well-trod themes of perpetual foreigner and model minority. So the longer we are in conversation as Asian Americans, the more familiar we are with these terms. I think what critical race theory or Asian crit, the particular manifestation of critical race theory for Asian Americans, what it can help us do is to ask the next level question. So at the kitchen table, we're accustomed to asking questions about, how do we feel about being made to feel perpetually foreign? Or when was the last time we experienced a kind of model minority mentality from someone that we related to? But what CRT has gradually trained me to think is, what are the cultural phenomena, or what are the texts like movies, books? What are the church bylaws? What are the pieces of legislation that continue to manufacture perpetual foreignness and the feeling of being a model minority? So there's the phenomenon of model minority and the phenomenon of perpetual foreigner that we experience and we can talk about. Sometimes it's mostly grousing and complaining, but CRT asks us to take a look several levels deeper. What is the machinery that reproduces those things day after day, week after week? And what can we do about that machinery? And so I've begun to train my attention in that direction. It doesn't mean I stop talking about it at the kitchen table. I still have many grievances, but I want to be proactive about changing the DNA of organization. So take the church as probably my most local example. I was on a bylaw revision committee, and I was thinking about are there phrases, are there particular bylaws in our church's DNA level document that manufacture or continue to perpetuate inequalities according to race and ethnicity? And wherever I could improve language to safeguard the future of equality for our church, I did my very best. And a lot of folks, your average churchgoer might say something cute like, "Oh, I hate bylaws. That stuff is arcane and it's not for me." But that is the level at which CRT trains us to think about the perpetuation of these kinds of phenomena like perpetual foreignness. So that's why I've gone in that direction.
That's super helpful, Jeff. Um, for those in the audience who may only have a vague impression of what the perpetual foreigner and model minority stereotypes are for Asian Americans, could you put a little more flesh on the bones and suss that out for us and maybe even illustrate it for us?
Sure. I mean, ooh, it's painful to do so. These are our awkward memories, right? So I remember one time in suburban Detroit, going to a large megachurch, and this is the most on the nose example I can think of. A very well-meaning greeter comes up to me and very slowly and over articulatedly says to me, "The international student group is over there." Right? So talk about foreignness. She viewed my body as a foreign body and with the most love in her heart intended to include me. So it's not about intentions. CRT is not about intentions. Racial reconciliation is not about intentions. The impact of her action toward me was to say, "Oh, you must be foreign." Now, the fact that I grew up here is meaningful to me. So implying that I'm a foreigner had a certain kind of effect. There are folks for whom that's not true. They laugh it off. It's, they really center the good intentions. But for many folks, the fact that we grew up here is so deeply meaningful to us that the insinuation that we're foreign can be deeply painful. There's a spectrum of experience there. So that's an example of perpetual foreignness.
That's really helpful. And do you have one also for model minority?
I mean, don't we all have so many? I mean, okay, so um, it ranges from everybody thinking I work for the Geek Squad at Best Buy to
Sorry.
like, yeah, I mean, right? Like,
Sorry. Yeah. That we're good at math.
yeah, that kind of stuff. So people will mistake me for that. I used to say to myself, I must just have a really like kind face because people are always asking me for help with their computer.
Oh
Now,
boy.
people may think, well, but you are good at that. Or they may even go further and say, Asians are good at that. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes there may be statistical kind of pieces of evidence that you could show that suggest that the percentage of Asian Americans that go into computer science may be higher than the general population. You could pull that kind of stuff out. But to carry that assumption or that statistic into your daily life and just assume that it's true and treat people that way because it will always inevitably fail. You might be right some percentage of the time, but the minute that you're wrong, you've made an assumption that really says that who I am doesn't matter to you. You don't need to learn about me. And that can be a kind of painful thing that is a painful thing that we've experienced for so long. And it follows a certain theme. So we walk around the world knowing that kind of stuff is coming. We brace for it. Some of us are just like, whatever, it happens. But others of us are deeply impacted by it. And that, again, is another spectrum of experience that we want to be respectful of. That's my experience. I'm sure you all have some as well. I mean, we could share our pain here today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah. So with regard to these experiences that you talk about, which obviously is a very common experience among so many Asian Americans, I'm curious how you find your book, right, on critical race theory and Christian ethics. How do you find that entering into this conversation? And particularly, I'm just really curious what the main idea of your book is and how you think this idea matters, right? And
Yeah.
in the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I appreciate that this is a Asian American centered conversation. But I do want to say that we wrote the book out of our um, experience working with a wider population of young people of color. So I was a pastor in the local church for 8 years. And one of the great privileges of my life was to build um, a, uh, a young adult group that was majority young people of color. And it's really their experiences, and that included some Asian Americans as well, but it was really their experiences of the church that drove me to write the book, because I watched them, especially after the 2016 political season, I watched them slowly gravitate, well, not gravitate, but kind of like loosen their grip on community life in the church. And it was for some of the saddest reasons. I mean, things that were said from the pulpit, ways in which the the killings of black men was not treated with the kind of gravity and seriousness in the cultural moment. The ways in which calls for racial justice went unheard in the church. These are some of the ways that that the book is situated, and it for me as an Asian American, it's a particular call for us to pay attention to the racialized pain of other communities of color. We have our own, and it is past time for us to be paying attention to that, which is why I'm so grateful for your work and the center. But we can't do this by ourselves. It doesn't do to do this by ourselves. So our attentiveness to the collective racial trauma and pain that we experience as people of color in the United States, that's really where the book is located.
What do you think, Jeff, is at stake for the Christian church in the US with respect to issues of race? So it's like this is written by academics. Um, you are also a minister. The church figures into this conversation in important ways, but can you, if there's a call to attention or maybe even a call to action, what might that be for the church based on your main arguments in the book?
Sure, sure. Yeah. Let me start with something that's really proximal. I, both as a professor and now in my work as the director of theological formation for InterVarsity, we get requests nonstop for resources that are sometimes the language is shrouded in politeness, like non-Western resources, Bible commentaries, preaching resources, ministry approaches that are quote unquote non-Western. But what folks really mean, and sometimes are explicit about, is non-white ministry, biblical, theological resources. We get that all the time, nonstop. And kind of what we're saying in the book is that it's past time for us to really get serious about that. And what a church can do is to begin to diversify the range of resources that they draw from. So I'll give you an example. I think in some Asian American churches that I was acquainted with, and even when I went to China with Fuller Seminary to do some traveling and corresponding with some education institutions, the percentage of folks that were just reading John Calvin, who, by the way, I'm a Calvinist, so I'm happy that they're reading John Calvin. But the number of Asian Americans that voraciously read like a John Piper or a Tim Keller or Mark Dever or folks like these, good folks, I suppose, but have no idea where they would get anything from a womanist scholar or a black a minister in the black intellectual tradition or something from Latin American liberation, or look at those things sideways because they're suspect without ever having tried it. They just take it as a kind of legacy factoid that we don't do that. We don't look into those things. What it means is that we keep all of our resources white and predominantly male. But what I'm telling churches now is, listen, don't shoot the messenger, but we get these requests nonstop every day. People want resources that are not like that. They're looking for a Christianity that is discontinuous with the legacy of whiteness and white supremacy. So now is the time to begin diversifying those resources. Um, for us, that has to do with the book because what we're saying is, listen, it's not about your intentions. One of CRT's kind of big things, especially for the church, is you can be super well intended to be inclusive and wonderful, but it's the impact. It's the impact of the legacy of whiteness and white supremacy and what it has on the impact that it has on communities of color, and especially young people of color in our case, that we want to be mindful of. And so to scrutinize every level of your church programming from the bylaw DNA level all the way to the kinds of ministry that you do, the worship stuff, the preaching illustrations, the shape of your community life, all of these things are worth auditing now in order to create a future that says to folks who are looking for a Christianity that's discontinuous with the legacies of white supremacy, that they are welcome here, and that pastors and clergy are thinking about the future that includes them.
2 follow-up comments or questions. What happens for churches, and if you could specify whether these are like multiracial congregations or Asian ethnic congregations,
Yeah.
what happens if the churches don't do the racial audit?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start with the multi-ethnic congregations. Multi-ethnic congregations that don't do the racial audit, they're predominantly just doing a majority culture, whether it's the majority culture of their church, whether it's Black, Asian, white, etc., or they're doing the dominant United States contextual majority culture kind of church. So essentially, they're just not thinking about other folks who might be in the community. And in many cases, they're not thinking about the community that surrounds the church, right? So that's actually true for some of the churches that I've been a part of. But in the case of Asian American churches or other ethnic specific churches, what's happening there is it's a different phenomenon. It's a different conversation, right? So there's a reason for ethnic specific churches. Sometimes it has to do with language. Sometimes it has to do with culture. I'm not as prepared to talk about those in a more corrective light than I am to talk about them in an encouraging light. The question that I have for ethnic specific churches is, how will you curate relationships and resources so that you prepare your children and people that you send off for a world that is not as ethnic specific as the community that you're a part of? So I would ask the same questions about bylaws, the shape of community life, the resources that you use for preaching, commentaries, etc. But if folks are being intentional about the kind of cultivation of ethnicity and race, that is valuable. That's endlessly valuable. I want to be super affirming of that.
And the second follow-up to your earlier comments, I want to pick up a couple of the crumbs that you've so artfully laid out. One being CRT is not concerned with intent, but with effect.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece now is this racial audit of church bylaws, practices, and what I would say are structures.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I appreciate about what you're doing, Jeff, is you're modeling a form of power analysis. You're saying that the critical component of the power analysis has less to do with someone's intent, but with the effects of their actions, such as the kinds of theological commentaries they lift up and don't lift up. What does that say about perhaps implicit bias that favors a certain form of Christianity coming out of the Anglo-European Christendom tradition, and yet neglects what the Spirit of Christ is doing, let's say indigenously in Taiwan or Hong Kong or Korea or India? I see you nodding, so I can kind of run with this. I personally think, because I also fit the understanding and the description and the analysis of racialization under this more broad category of simply power analysis of how society and social structures work and how the church is not immune because the church is not hermetically sealed from the world, correct?
Correct.
Therefore, we ought to have a theological analysis of these structures that, yes, impact the church.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious, as you are engaging faith leaders in the church, outside of the church, Asian faith leaders, first gen, second gen, what have you. And I think your position with InterVarsity that equips, serves, disciples, mentors, leads the next generation of Christian leaders, Asian and otherwise, that's a really critical strategic vantage point. How are the churches picking up the power analysis? Like, do churches find it like, oh, that's not biblical? Or, oh, that's I didn't know that name exists, but I do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are people responding in some ways to the book and to the power analysis?
Yeah, it's as varied as you just suggested, ranging from folks who think that power analysis is a tool of the left, and so we don't do that because Marx is bad, right? To folks who really do it every day because, I mean, they have jobs in the workaday world where they have to do it no matter what. I mean, one of the things that I've said on numerous opportunities to talk about the book has been the phrase "follow the money." That's, people might say, well, that sounds Marxist, but I think both right and left, and I don't love the political spectrum in the United States, but both right and left are now all following the money, like which advertisers are really driving the news and that kind of stuff. So this kind of power analysis is quite common. It happens every day. It happens in every family, like who's got the power, and whether implicit or explicit, we're all doing that kind of power analysis. But I mean, let's be honest. When it comes to CRT, most churches have no clue what it is and don't have time to invest in it. So I'm not sure that our book, which is an academic, is part of the academic imprint from Baker, is gonna really become like a runaway household name, right? And really, the news media is driving what folks think about CRT. I mean, book for us is really a labor of love that says that there is a truth about CRT and there are lies about CRT. You can get the lies from the news media. That's easy. But you do, just as you said, David, you do already do this power analysis. Now, let me show you how theology, even the most well-trod themes of theology, like you'll see in the book, creation, fall, redemption, consummation, that's our signal that the themes of critical race theory are not alien to the Christian tradition. In many ways, we predate the kind of scrutiny and tools that CRT uses. And in other ways, there are discontinuities that are worth observing. But yeah, with regard to power analysis, either folks love it or they hate it. But I would argue that even folks who say they hate it, they do it too.
I know Yanan wants to jump in with the next comment or question, but I can't resist since we're in the Olympics and I'm catching up from, video clips coming out of Paris. And because my son plays basketball, I follow the USA basketball team.
Yeah.
On the note of follow the money, there's a reason why Kawhi Leonard got
Mhm.
cut from the team. And the speculation that why Kawhi Leonard got cut from the team is he's sponsored by New Balance and not by Nike. And so I don't know how true this is, but again, the money aspect permeates so much.
Yeah.
And analysis of the money flows,
Mhm.
the budget lines, what we allocate our resources towards, and money is a form of resource that indicates where the power lies,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So any church treasurer who understands who the major tithers are and the
Mhm.
major expenses on the budget, they are already well into the power analysis. It's
Yes.
just called accounting.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely
So
called. And I have to follow up with that and say, my daughter's going to the University of Oregon, Nike Central, right? And unlimited NIL funds for their football team, NIL, name, image, likeness, players getting money. which didn't used to be the case until the high-profile NCAA kind of case from Northwestern. Anyway, the power balance in football is shifting because of money. But additionally, the experience of the student will shift. What it means to go to college will shift because of money and power. And to add a racial analysis to that is really the work of CRT. Anyway, you're right on, and I love it. So, yeah.
That's really awesome. Actually, kind of connected to that question as well of power analysis, right? I feel very struck. Also, you mentioned this just in the previous response, just the way you structured the book, right?
Mhm.
Creation, fall, redemption, consummation. And what's really interesting to me about that is there's actually a lot of skepticism among a lot of Christians regarding CRT, right? CRT has kind of become this buzzword to represent something that is problematic, maybe wrong, like morally, and it's just not politically useful, right? In a lot of Christian circles. But what's really fascinating is when I look at the table of contents, right? And you're talking about CRT, but the base structure of the book is theological. It follows the redemptive narrative of the Bible, of the scriptures. So
Mhm.
I'm just really curious again how you're framing and just the process of how you wrote the book
Sure.
and why you chose that structure
Yeah,
for
yeah,
a contested topic.
yeah. Happy to explain. So, when I began learning CRT, reading documents from legal scholars who were writing in the late 70s, in the early 70s, into the 80s, and continue to write. As I was reading that, what struck me as a student of theology um, was how much resonance there really was. Now, I had this intervarsity training that said that racial reconciliation and multi-ethnicity, these were important, that they're grounded in scripture, right? The evangelical kind of ministry type of approach to the scripture. I bring that training into my PhD studies and reading critical race theory and thinking there really is some significant resonance. I'm going to have to articulate what this is like. So we'll take a keystone tenet of critical race theory, like in chapter 1, creation, that theme. There's a tenet called uh, uh, cultural wealth, community cultural wealth, particularly from CRT in the field of educational studies. Um, there's there's a way of treating students from communities of color, either as students that lack something or students that possess wealth, community cultural wealth. So in the past, in very tragic ways, we have said, oh, you're from that community, you must not know X, Y, and Z. Or you must not know how to do this. Or you must not know how to spell the word yacht, right? So think about that. Of course, that's not something from their context, and we think of them in terms of lack. But the scriptures teach us that there is the fingerprint of God in every culture. So if that is the case, then what we should see is something like what critical race theory theorizes, especially in the field of educational studies, that every student from a community of color possesses a kind of wealth that you might not recognize as wealth. You may see it as deficit, but what we want to do is draw from that wealth and transform the educational experience for the student. So, for example, Tara Yoso, who's an educational scholar who uses CRT frameworks, says that one of the forms of wealth is spiritual capital. That when a student from a community of color who is steeped in the church tradition goes to college, one of the ways that they are resilient to navigate a system that was not built for them is to call out to God or to root their understanding of their struggle in their religious narrative. So religion becomes a really important asset for student success. I mean, to me, that's a positive kind of analysis that's born of saying, not deficit, that's the critical part of CRT, but really wealth. To me, that's the scriptural, theological part that is beautiful. So we march through these well-trod themes and we take some tenet from CRT and illustrate how they resonate or how they don't resonate.
I'm curious if your research revealed things that were surprising to you that you did not know before. So I just learned, you know, in that last clip, oh, that's a new resource. I'm very curious. You piqued my interest.
Yeah.
Were there other aha moments that broke through to you as you were researching and writing the book?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that was, I don't know if aha is the right word, but it was like a ooh kind of a response. Um, there are folks who use critical race frameworks, but um, in the same kind of universe of activism, they're really wary of using CRT. So, for example, there's a legal scholar who is aware of all that CRT has to offer, but says, you know what, this doesn't capture, for example, the experience of Black religious people. I mean, one of his arguments, which I've made in the case of Asian Americans, is that nobody knows, not nobody, I want to be careful about overstatement, but his argument was that even though James Cone is such a well-known scholar and theologian, many churches in the Black church tradition have never read a theology of Black liberation and probably won't get to it. Um, it's the younger folks who end up doing it, but they have not been formed in that way. And so CRT, therefore, does not capture the experience of the people they want to be serving all the time. So that for me was not an aha. It was more like oh, there is more complexity to this. And especially, I'm, obviously interested in the religious dynamics of all of this conversation. There's more description. There's a thicker description to be had out there. And that's what keeps the research going.
Let me just follow up on this piece. And it hooks me back to an earlier part of our conversation where you were talking about, I think, uh, kitchen table conversations kind of amongst non-scholars about issues pertaining to race. But you are also a scholar. So I think the different hats you wear as a scholar, as a minister, increases your sense of how to communicate rhetorically so that it yields pragmatic effect, right? So what I'm hearing from
Hopefully.
yeah, what I'm hearing from the example you gave is on the ground, people communicate in this way. And in the guild, people communicate that way.
Hmm.
These ways of communication may not be very helpful or mutually recognizable.
Yeah.
So then comes Jeff Liu. How do you navigate? And let's talk about the Asian American church. Many first gen Asian Christians who come to the US come from a ethnically homogenous country
Mhm.
where racial difference is not even in their consciousness. They're more about class difference. There are poor people who live there, there are wealthy people who live there, and perhaps ethnic difference. That region of this area, they speak this dialect. We don't speak that dialect here. Those are the social conditions that they bring with them to America, where then they realize, oh, there's a racial hierarchy and I belong somewhere on it.
Hmm.
Uh, Perhaps they come to that sort of
Yeah.
burgeoning racial consciousness over time when they live and work in the United States. But how do you, um, if one of the goals is to raise consciousness in the Asian American context about things like race and power analysis,
Hmm.
how do you do that as a pastor, as a kind of community organizer, as a scholar?
Mm. Well, in large part, it's to tell a different story, which is one of the tools of CRT. I mean, the story that even you just told, I think folks do carry that story from their immigrant experience over to the United States. I'll tell you a story of my own. When I was in China, uh, I was witnessing something happening in the classroom with a white psychologist giving a lecture to a room full of Chinese students. And a Chinese student stands up and says, really raises an objection about like, why is this religious stuff important? And he points his finger accusingly, like, what we're really about is having a bigger GDP than the United States. And once that happens, then we can talk about religion. There was a clear priority, right? So the awareness, because of globalization and transnationalism, the awareness of racial hierarchies is already there. Now you might think, well, that's just a global economic hierarchy. Well, in race and ethnic studies, we just don't separate these things. They're always kind of put together this way. A person can take that thinking, that kind of racialized thinking that says, like, there is a we that will encounter an other. And as a Chinese American church, for example, we can build a congregational life, which many of our congregations have, that deliberately or unthinkingly does not have any social intercourse with the world outside. I mean, when I moved to Southern California, somebody told me, if you don't want to speak English here in Southern California, you don't have to. It's actually quite easy to be a part of a community which you never have to speak English. And you'll remember that, like Monterey Park, Alhambra, once they started putting up street signs in Chinese characters, there was this massive backlash, right? So these are places where you don't have to interact with people if you don't want to, that causes you to cross cultures. That mentality still exists today. And I would argue that in our fractured cultural moment, we are more tempted to that kind of isolation than ever before. Now, because of that, I think it behooves us to be even more thoughtful about the gospel's call for us to cross cultures and for us to go into every nation, every tribe, language, tongue, and people to proclaim the gospel. So I think the story, the typical story is there's us and there's them. We're going to preserve us and we're going to defeat them. And the disruption that the gospel gives us is, no, we give it all away for the sake of others coming to know this one God in Jesus Christ, who loves us and whom we love. Doesn't mean an erasure of our own cultural distinctions, but it's a kind of stewardship and leveraging of those cultural distinctives for the sake of the gospel. Anyway, these things are well known.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, one of the one of the things that I find very compelling, not only about the book but also just this conversation we're having, is that it's very pragmatic. It's very practical in the sense that you're offering us like real stories from your own experiences, from the context you've served in, real experiences, and I'm also just really curious, especially with regard to the book's aims, right? Is what kinds of takeaways do you want people to have when they read the book? What do you actually want people to do in the world after reading the book?
Yeah. We have a handful of aims for the book, but if I could start with the one that's most deeply in my heart, I want to say to especially young people of color, that the church is your inheritance. Your inheritance is the people of God. This is what the scriptures say, like that we are waiting for our inheritance. The Holy Spirit is this down payment, this deposit. And the promise is that we will inherit the earth. We will be co-regents with the God of justice. And so in this life, I know the pain and the difficulty that causes folks to leave the church, but for young people of color who are listening to the podcast, I want to say that no one should rob you of your inheritance. It is yours. It is your birthright. And so all the structures and systems that stand in the way of that continue to perpetuate and machine new clever forms of racism. These are the worthwhile work of dismantling. I mean, it's worth you paying attention to the dynamics of these things. You could opt for a non-church world in which it's just you and maybe a small group of friends and you're huddled together and you're caring for each other. That is beautiful in its own way. But I hope that for all those who call themselves by the name of Jesus, who organize themselves into these churches, which sometimes have heinous forms of injustice associated with them, the dismantling of those structures and systems, that's what CRT is in Christianity is aimed at. That kind of dismantling work, that kind of rewriting, that kind of new storytelling. If you withdraw, I hope it's a strategic withdrawal that ends up bringing you back with new stories of God's faithfulness to you, so that you can redeem a place that is wrecked by the legacy of white supremacy and racism. That's the big hope, right? That's the big one. But our smaller one is just to tell the truth. Like, it was a Republican strategist who decided that he would tell lies. He said this on Twitter. It's a matter of record. He said, we did it. We stuffed CRT with all the kind of liberal craziness that we know our party doesn't like. So now that anytime someone references CRT, they'll think of all these crazy things we don't like. That was the strategy. It worked brilliantly. And that's not actually that hard to do. You just take a word and you fill it with all kinds of nonsense, right? So our goal was just to tell the truth. This is what CRT actually is. Here's where it comes from. And these are the ways that it can be helpful. And these are the ways that it doesn't resonate with the Christian tradition. And so, that kind of truth-telling we think is important because churches are now complicit in lying about what CRT is. And we just don't want to be there. So that's a smaller goal, which you might say is still a big goal, but we have bigger ones.
Truth telling is a Christian obligation.
Amen.
So thank you, Jeff, for saying that. And the metaphor you left me with is, in order for the church to grow, especially with the next generation, we need to remove the barriers to growth. In order for the garden to flourish, we need to do some weeding. And I think your book is a tool to help us remove barriers for the growth and flourishing of the body of Christ. And so on that theological, ecclesial, perhaps even eschatological hope, Jeff, Yanan and I are tremendously grateful to you and Robert for the labor of scholarly love that you have bequeathed to the church, Asian and otherwise. And we just thank you for the book and for this podcast conversation.
So happy to be here. Glad for the work that you do. And thanks for highlighting our work.